I suppose there's an election coming up, and we all talk about our rights, and we talk about the right to vote and suffrage, and we talk about people fighting for our rights, and we talk about the men of 1916 and what they fought for, and I think the women of 1916 as well, because of course the proclamation was addressed them directly. And if there's one document you can take that attempts, I don't think it can fully, but attempts to sum up what the whole period was about, it's the Proclamation. I'm going to argue it's not perfect. I'm going to argue that it was following in a long tradition. It was a very definite set pattern going right back to the United Irishmen, and there was a kind of a way of writing a proclamation that Pearse, that Connolly, that Clark would all have been familiar with, and the 1916 Proclamation follows in that vein. I was reading a great book by Ray Wilkinson. It's a history of the Special Branch in London, and he was a Special Branch officer himself, and he obviously would have been there at the time of the Provisional IRA's campaign, the Troubles, but he wrote the history going right back to the Fenians who bombed London, IRA activities there in the 1920s, and as I said, it's a brilliant book, but I was quite disappointed with his description of Irish republicanism. He summed it up as Irish Catholics with a fanatical hatred of the British. That's what it was all about, plain and simple. Interestingly, he spent far more time explaining what anarchism was than he did the philosophy of republicanism. And religious fanaticism, yeah, that exists in Ireland. Anglophobia, anti-British feeling, that exists. Tribal nationalism, that exists everywhere. But I'm going to argue that Irish republicanism is something different. It's far more complex than tribal nationalism. It's based on the Enlightenment politics of the French Revolution. And if we need kind of bullet points of what that philosophy was, then the proclamations of John Shears in 1798, he was captured before he could publish it, Robert Emmet in 1803, Kelly's proclamation, if we're going to put a person on it, the Fenian Proclamation of 1867, and of course the one we simply refer to as the Proclamation because it's the most recent, the 1916 Proclamation. And they're really condensed expressions of the thought and politics of the period. So what we're going to cover here is where did the leaders of the 1916 Rising take their inspiration from when they were writing it? How does the 1916 Proclamation relate to the previous efforts? And I have to stress this is only a brief overview. For example, if I took Robert Emmet's Proclamation and wanted to analyse it in detail, we'd be here until next week. It's a phenomenal document, there's a huge amount of stuff in it. I'm picking bullet points. The other thing I'm keen to stress is my own research is mainly on the War of Independence period, the Civil War, the Easter Rising. I'm familiar with the earlier periods, but I'm not an expert, okay? The lecture is too short to give a definite history of detailed republicanism from 1798 to 1916. I'm just looking at proclamations and their role in it. And again, I can't go into all the details of each specific proclamation, but the text is free online. And this, by the way, the 7 signatories in the top of the Easter Rising proclamation, the Provisional Government. I suppose, going right back to the beginning of it, the American Declaration of Independence. The American Revolution of 1776 inspires the French Revolution of 1789, inspires the United Irishmen to be founded, and the Irish Revolution of 1798. The American Revolution, though, is different to 1916, 1798, mainly because of the makeup of the people involved. The American revolutionaries are primarily colonists. They've come over from England. These are not Apaches leading or Pimas or Blackfoots leading the American Revolution. Their parentage, their background is English. Generally, the American revolutionaries didn't have a problem with England as the mother country and having a link to England. Their problem was with how they were being governed. Their slogan was no taxation without representation. So they felt they were being governed unfairly, that it was a tyranny, but again, it's a different kind of thing to 1916, 1798, 1803, because those proclamations tend to stress that England never had a right to rule Ireland, that English rule in Ireland was completely illegitimate from the beginning, and that the proclamations were merely reasserting that fact. The American Declaration of Independence, just to cover it briefly, it explains how the American colonists have been forced unwillingly into fighting against the mother country, England. had been at war with England for about a year and a half, 2 years at that stage, and they were eager to explain to the world how the situation had come about. They wanted to highlight the grievances that they felt had been perpetrated against them, and then it declares independence from England because of what they had outlined had happened, and it sets out then the rights of the new citizens. So, as I said, it's different, a colony breaking away where it's colonists doing it, than Irish people who were saying that regardless of their background, England never had a legitimacy, its government never had a legitimacy. But just because the 1916 Proclamation and the American Declaration of Independence are coming from different places doesn't mean that the 1916 rebels aren't looking back and drawing inspiration from it. At the top we can see the closing paragraph of the American Declaration of Independence. With a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, God in other words, we mutually pledge each other our lives and fortunes and our sacred honour. And then in 1916, we place the cause of the Irish Republic under the protection again, of the Most High God. We pledge our lives and the lives of our comrades in arms to the cause. There's a very definite link there. I don't think that's accidental. The French Revolution, the rights of man in 1789. The French Revolution, when it starts, is about a lot of things, but it's citizens asserting, subject to the king, asserting what their rights are. This is a bit like the Magna Carta. It's the people telling the king, you have to govern us fairly. The French Revolution doesn't set out immediately to establish a republic. So a document like the Rights of Man is a bit different to an Irish Republican proclamation, but Irish republicanism owes a huge amount to French republicanism. It really is a massive inspiration to it. And of course, the Society of United Irishmen, the first Irish Republicans, founded in Belfast and in Dublin in 1791. The name they pick is very interesting, United Irishmen. It's not the natives rebelling against the colonisers, it's people from all different backgrounds, Catholic, Protestant, dissenter, to unite them under the common name of Irishmen, to establish an Irish Republic, to break the connection with England. You all with me so far? You can all hear me?
Oh, perfect.
Not boring you with this yet?
No.
Not yet. I will before we're finished. Okay? So the United Irishmen, you have a knowledge which you don't need me to go into details. The first Republican proclamation, I would argue, there's many different proclamations were big posters that were put up to say something is happening. They didn't have Facebook in 1798, so you put up posters around the place. The king is dead, there's a new king coming, the church tithes are being abolished or collected. It was a way of getting the news out there. So you would see proclamations for all sorts of different things, land sales, but we're talking about political Republican proclamations. The first real one, I would argue, is John Shears in 1798. John Shears is a Protestant Republican, again influenced by the French Revolution. He had spent time in France during the Revolution, and he joined the United Irishmen in 1793, it would appear. In March of 1798, the rebellion is being plotted, and the Leinster Directory of United Irishmen, the people from Wexford, from Carlow, from Wicklow, from Dublin, who are plotting the revolution, all meet in Oliver Bond's house, and they're all rounded up in one swoop by the authorities. An interesting story I was told about this is that the Wexford delegate didn't actually make it in time. He was drinking in the Bleeding Horse pub, so he arrived late and possibly a bit drunk, and everyone else got picked up. He didn't. He went back to Wexford and the organisation remained intact there. How true that story is, I don't know, but after this meeting anyway, Shears gets promoted up the ranks and he becomes one of the leaders of the insurrection. Now he's arrested before the rebellion properly gets going in Leinster, but when they arrest him they find a draft copy of a proclamation at his home. There's at least one paragraph in it that's half written. It's used in evidence against him at his trial, and he's executed on Bastille Day, 14th of July 1798, at the height of the rebellion. So to look at his proclamation, really it's a call to arms. You know, he's key in setting the date for the rebellion, the 23rd of May. He's arrested 2 days beforehand. He's concerned mostly with military matters. He sets out that the rebels should fight, interestingly, using a type of urban guerrilla warfare and should arm themselves however they can. It also, though, sets out the rights of Irish citizens, and it proclaims an independent republic. So you have 2 or 3 things happening in most proclamation. The establishment of a republic, declaration of independence, call to arms, and the rights of the citizen. So I would argue that Shears' proclamation sets the tone for the later ones, particularly 1803 and 1916. To compare them, it starts off Irishmen. Now we know 1916, Irish men and Irish women, but Irishmen, it's addressing the people of Ireland directly. Your country is free, you are about to be avenged. The vile government which has so long and so cruelly oppressed you is no more. It doesn't specifically state we've set up a republic, but then again the draft is unfinished, it's never published. But what it does say is English government is over, tyranny has ended, we're all free men. I think that's what he was coming to. The national flag, the sacred green, is flying over the rules of despotism. Think of the 1916 proclamation, Ireland summons her children to her flag, okay, rallying people to the standard, same kind of language. Religion, it refers to natural justice and the God of nature. Now just because proclamations refer to God, that doesn't mean the people writing them are intensely religious. That would have been standard language of the time. And interestingly, in the early documents, it doesn't refer to God directly. It refers to natural justice, the God of nature. It would reflect the deism of the French Revolutionary period. Who were deists? They were people that believed that a God existed, but didn't necessarily work through churches and ordered religion. Citizens' rights. We will never sheathe the sword until every being in the country is restored to the equal rights which the God of nature has given to all men. Again, this is like the rights of man. Until an order of things shall be established in which no superiority shall be acknowledged amongst the citizens of Éireann, but that of virtue and talent. It's essentially saying all citizens are equal. There's no establishment, there's no lords, it's a republic, we're all citizens. And in 1916 you look at equal rights and equal civil liberties. Again, it's drawing on the same themes. And then it finishes up by saying, remember what thousands have perished by their orders, the British remember or. William Orr was a United Irishman executed in 1797, I think, and it was basically to set an example to other Protestant Republicans in particular not to get involved in the rebellion. But think of 1916, how does the proclamation start? In the name of God and the dead generations. In both cases they're harking back to, as Pearse would have put it, the Fenian dead. So that's a brief look at John Shears' proclamation. The United Irishmen issued dozens of proclamations about local matters, and big things and small, but the only one which I think comes close to having an overall national policy that I'm aware of, and again I'm not an expert as Shears, you do get another one, 1798, General Humbert's proclamation. Humbert is the French general who's come over to assist the United Irishmen lands in Mayo. And he proclaims a republic, but it's the Republic of Connaught. Now, it's a bit different because it's not an Irish provisional government, it's not Irish rebels proclaiming it in this case, it's the French proclaiming it, and it's the French addressing Irishmen. So there's a bit of a different thing going on there. It's mainly a call to arms. You know, Humbert is a military man, he's arrived in Ireland with a small invasion force, but how he proclaims it, I think, is very important to Easter 1916. He has the flag of, this is obviously a slightly different setting, but he has the flag of the United Irishmen, the green flag with the gold harp and the words Éireann go Bragh, Ireland forever, flown over a building. He steps out the front, he reads a proclamation, he declares a republic. And I would argue that's the same choreography, it's the same drama that's being used by Pearse and the rebels in 1916. Robert Emmet's Proclamation. So this is the first fully formed proclamation that really gets published. You can see it's exceptionally long. Okay, so again, we're not going to go through all this in detail. Who was Emmet? Emmet was from a liberal Dublin Protestant family, very sympathetic towards the plight of Irish Catholics, non-sectarian, the politics of the United Irishmen, very interested in the proceedings of the American Revolution. His brother, Thomas Addis Emmet, is very involved as well, is a friend of Wolfe Tone. And Robert is involved in United Irish politics in Trinity College. I think he's expelled from the college as a result. He goes to France for a period, but he comes back in late 1802, and he's trying to pull together, after the 1798 rebellion, the remnants of the underground Republican movement and to relaunch it. And he does it as part of a group, the Provisional Government. And his proclamation starts off, the Provisional Government to the Irish people. So this isn't like General Humbert, it's not the French telling the Irish what to do, it's Emmet's Provisional Government. Who's in the Provisional Government, we don't know exactly. This is a conspiracy. This thing is drawn up in secret. Certainly Emmet seems to have drafted the proclamation. We have one surviving draft, a surviving draft was used at his trial, and it was in his own handwriting. Emmet was in very close contact with his brother throughout the period, Thomas Addis Emmet. Even when his brother was locked up in Scotland, Emmet appears to have gotten over to actually visit him. So it's quite possible he had a strong input, and the other person then was William Dowdall. He was another United Irishman, and when his house was searched, papers relating to the drafting of a proclamation were found in it, so he may have involved. But who else was involved other than Emmet, we don't know exactly, and we might never. So how does it start off? The Provisional Government to the people of Ireland. The word provisional is very important. This is not a dictatorship. They admit in the proclamation, we're here for the moment. We are reasserting the existing Irish right to independence, and once that has been established and acknowledged throughout the world, we will step aside and there will be free and fair elections. And again, it says that specifically in the proclamation. The intention of the Provisional Government is to resign as soon as the nation shall have chosen its delegates. And it sets out that there will be an Irish Parliament of 300 people, and it redraws boundaries, and it goes into incredible detail on how the country is going to be governed afterwards, but we don't have the time to go into that. But the same wording, Provisional Government, is used in 1803, in 1867, in 1916. So this is really setting a precedent. And the other thing is, in more recent times, it's where, whether you like them or not, the Provisional IRA took their title from. Not from Robert Emmet's proclamation, but from the repetition of that in 1916. Again, there's many different themes in Emmet's proclamation. You can find the text online. I'd encourage you to read it. You are now called on to show the world that you are competent to take your place amongst the nations. It's very much echoing his speech from the dock. That you have a right to claim their recognisance of you as an independent country by the only satisfactory proof you can furnish your capability of maintaining your independence by wresting it from England with your own hands. This is something Emmet is very keen on. He's not going to be a lapdog for the French. He wants Irish people. These are their rights, they need to establish them themselves. If French help comes, it's welcome. But Emmet is very strong that Ireland is not going to become part of the French Empire, or the French will arrive and run things. He wants Irish people in command. And again, it talks about French help. And I think if you go to 1916, there's echoes of that. Supported by exiled children in America and gallant allies in Europe, but relying in the first on her own strength. We want Irish people to strike the blow. It's the same thing as 1803. Wrest your liberty from England with your own hands. The Republic. So, Emmet talks about what the Republic is going to be. Our object is to establish a free and independent Republic in Ireland. That the pursuit of this object we will relinquish only with our lives. That we will never, unless at the express call of our country, abandon our post until the acknowledgement of its independence is obtained from England. So he's very clear from the beginning they're establishing their own republic, and again, in the words of the Declaration of Independence, they're declaring their life to the cause, and the same thing again in 1916. Religious freedoms. Republicanism really comes from, I suppose, being the United Irishmen being fed up with the sectarian mould and makeup of Irish politics, and the ideas from the French Revolution: liberty, equality, fraternity, that we're all equal, we're all brothers. And a lot of the proclamations are very concerned with sectarian issues and religion. So in Emmetts Proclamation he says, religious disqualification is but one of the many grievances under which Ireland has to complain. Our intention is to remove not only that, but every other oppression under which we labour. We fight that all of us may have our country, and each of us shall have his religion. Very similar idea to what the Fenians have later. You can all practice religion freely, but don't impose it on others. Republicans throughout are very opposed and upset by the role of clerical authority in Irish society, but that doesn't mean that they are anti-religious. They're just worried about social freedoms. Tithes are forever abolished, and church lands are the property of the nation, so that's quite radical. Even though, again, this document invokes God, I wouldn't describe it as being a religious text. We war not against property. We war against no religious sect. We war not against past opinions or prejudices, any religious conflict in the past, we're putting that aside. We war against English domination. Very similar again to 1916, religious and civil liberty regardless of past differences. Invoking God, as I said, happens, I think, in all the proclamations, and the last line of Emmetts Proclamation, fully impressed with the justice of our cause, which we have now put to issue, we make our last and solemn appeal to the sword and to heaven, and as the cause of Ireland deserves to prosper, may God give her victory. God grant us victory is kind of his closing lines. And the same in 1916. We place the cause of the Irish Republic under protection of the Most High God, whose blessing we invoke on our arms. Military instructions. Now this is something where Emmett's and Shears' proclamation stand out as a bit different to the more recent ones. More recent proclamations, 67, 1916, are shorter, more concerned with politics. In Emmett's proclamation, he gives specific details to what the men of the North, the men of Leinster and the men of Connacht and Munster are to do, how they're to arm, what's to happen in each area. Remember, this guy's been organised, he's been meeting delegates from around the country, he's in touch with the grassroots, and he's very strongly warns against war crimes and mistreatment of civilians. Again, this is something that comes up in 1916, it warns against inhumanity and rapine. The difference is that Emmett's proclamation in 1803 is coming at the end of a period of rebellion. He has seen some of these things happen, or at least knows that they happened, and he's warning against them happening again. Whereas the 1916 proclamation is coming at the beginning of a revolutionary period, and it's warning against the possibility that they might happen. Okay? And really what Emmet seems to be referring to here is the very controversial School of Bogue massacre, which happens in Wexford, 5th of June 1798, same day as the Battle of New Ross. What happened is that 100 loyalists, would appear most of them had been civilians, were taken prisoner. I think they were put in a barn, and the barn was set on fire and they were killed. The majority of them would seem to have been Protestants. There have been allegations this was sectarian. A number of them, probably a minority, would have been Catholic loyalists as well. But this is something that Emmet clearly is concerned with, because he says, the nation alone possesses the right of punishing individuals, and whosoever shall put a person to death, except in battle without fair trial by his country, is guilty of murder. Okay? Death sentence still exists in Emmett's Republic, but it has to be authorised by the Provisional Government. Emmet states in the proclamation as well that he has a plan. Keep the loyalists alive. Your United Irish comrades who've been captured and transported to Australia, to North America, to Canada, wherever, we can bring them back. We can barter the prisoners. Don't kill them. The other thing Emmet is quite aware of is propaganda at the time. And he says it, the things that have happened in Ireland have been distorted against us. You are accused by your enemies of having violated that honour, excesses to which they themselves had in their fullest extent provoked, but which they have grossly exaggerated, have been attributed to you. The opportunity of vindicating yourselves by your actions is now for the first time before you. Basically, things that have happened in Ireland have been presented in the north and in England, and to loyalists as a sectarian uprising by Catholics. Okay? This is a woodcut from 1641, Irish Rebellion, and we see rebels here, Catholic rebels, piking and pitchforking babies. Okay? This is one that comes out in 1798, Pike Exercise. It's a propaganda cartoon. We see a rebel here killing a baby while his mother, is praying and pleading. The exact same here, same thing here. Praying mother, baby being pitchforked. But if you look here, the rebel has a cross on him. He has a pair of rosary beads on the end of his pike. This is the British Crown trying to say that the Irish Revolution is some sort of papal conspiracy and trying to keep Protestants away from it. So Emmet is conscious of the propaganda that's going on. He's trying to make sure his men can do their best to counter it. So Emmet reads the proclamation, or at least he reads part of it to his men at the beginning of the 1803 rebellion. It's estimated that 10,000 copies have been printed, and the plan was these were going to be distributed throughout Ireland as a means of spreading word of the rebellion. After Emmet's rebellion fails, and again I don't have time to go into the details, I assume you have a basic knowledge of Irish history and what happens, all the copies were immediately seized and destroyed. Okay? 2 or 3 survive today, and they seem to have been ones that were used in evidence against Emmet's fellow United Irishmen. And I would argue that looking at Robert Emmet's Proclamation, Patrick Pearse is very inspired by Emmet and his proclamation, and I think really it is the model for what happens in 1916. John Shears' one sets the ball rolling, Emmet's one sets out the template. Emmet is far better known for his speech from the dock. This is in part because the British basically cherry-picked parts from it to make it look as if Emmet was anti-French, and that's why that document would be much better known, would have been recited. For example, Abraham Lincoln used to recite it as a party piece, or more recently Mary McAleese could as well when she was a child. But again, Emmet wanted to be very clear that he wanted the Irish people to free themselves. French military aid was to be secondary and unconditional, that it wouldn't come with any strings attached. There is another proclamation, don't have time to talk about, in Scotland. In the 1820s, there was a Scottish radical movement. A fake proclamation was put out by the British. They knew there were lots of people like Emmet plotting, and they said, how can we get them all out into the open air? We'll put out a fake proclamation. Up they all sprung, and they were all gathered up and arrested. But the Scottish Insurrection of 1820, great book by Peter Burris-Fordellis, recommended to you. Anyway, the second kind of firm proclamation that we have is what's called the Fenian Proclamation, 1867. Published actually on the 10th of February, so today, 1867, in advance, it would appear, of the Fenians uprising. Who were the Fenians? They were basically another group similar to the United Irishmen who were underground conspiracy, plotting rebellion, established in 1858 on the 10th anniversary of the Young Irelanders Rebellion. But look, you have an idea who they are. That's the Fenian Proclamation. It's interesting in that no actual copy, no poster like Emmet's proclamation exists. Copies of it, large copies, were never made to be pasted up around public areas. Fenians had a different way of doing things. They were very interested in modern technology. They used dynamite, for example, in the later period and carried out bombings. Moriarty, for example, in Sherlock Holmes is based on the Fenians and their bombings in London at the time. It's another story. How they did it, modern technology, they printed off a few copies on cards and they posted them to newspapers all over Britain and Ireland, and they got the newspaper to publish it for them. It's a bit like in the 80s, the propaganda videos that came out from the north, or more recent, videos from the Middle East being sent out to the world. They were letting the media tell their story for them. The Fenian uprising, when it does happen, there's a massive mobilisation in Tallaght. There's ones in Cork, in Limerick, in Kerry, in parts of Clare, but really it's not very militarily successful. But while the Fenians mightn't have had military success, their politics were really radical, eras ahead of their time. The proclamation would appear to have been written largely by this guy, Colonel Thomas Kelly. He's, I think, a veteran of the US Civil War. He gains effective control of the IRB, which the Republican Brotherhood, the Fenians, a very fractious organisation, just before the 67 Rising. A provisional government is formed. Again, beyond Kelly, I don't think we know the exact membership of it. If anyone's interested in the Fenians in detail, any book by Shane McKenna, brilliant, well worth reading, excellent research. As I said, on the 10th of February 1867, the proclamation is issued. It's not pasted up around the country, it's sent to newspapers and they publish it. And in March 1867, I think a few weeks later, the rising begins. The main similarity between the Fenian Proclamation of 1867 and the Proclamation of 1916 is the word count. Okay, it's much shorter. It's much easier to read than Emmetts or John Shears, and I think we can go into it in detail and just pick out where there are similarities with 1916. So it's the Irish people to the people of the world. It's a bit different to 1916. It's not directly addressing Irishmen, it's pleading Ireland's cause on the international stage. And again, this is probably why they send it to the newspapers in London. We have suffered centuries of outrage. This is putting the Irish position into a historical context. It's the same thing they do in 1916, talking about 6 times in the last 300 years Irish people have asserted their right in arms. It's the same thing. And Emmet does that as well in 1803. He talks about the centuries of resistance to English or British rule in Ireland. Anyway, we have suffered centuries of outrage, enforced poverty and bitter misery. Our rights and liberties have been trampled on by an alien aristocracy who, treating us as foes, usurped our lands, drew away from our unfortunate country all material riches. The real owners of the soil were removed to make room for cattle and driven across the ocean. This proclamation was written with one eye on America and American support. Fenians very strong in America, and we see that echoed again later in 1916. Our exiled children in America is referred to. Again, the same thing is going on. They were driven across the ocean to seek the means of living and the political rights denied to them at home, while our men of thought and action were condemned to the loss of life and liberty. But we never lost the memory and the hope of a national existence. Again, it's stressing the Irish people had never accepted British rule. We're just reasserting our right to independence. We appealed in vain to the reason and sense of justice of the dominant powers. Our mildest remonstrances were met with sneers and contempt. Our appeal to arms was always unsuccessful. We've tried this before, we haven't been successful, but we have a legitimate right to do this. That's what they're saying here. Today, having no honourable alternative left, we again appeal to force as our last resource. The Fenians were very big, particularly under Charles Kickham later, in saying that it's only justifiable to have a rising if we have a chance of success. We accept the conditions of appeal, manfully deeming it better to die in the struggle for freedom than continue in the existence of utter serfdom. The United Irishmen said the same thing, liberty or death. Okay, we want freedom or we'll die trying to get it. All men are born with equal rights. Where does that come from? All men are created equal. That's the American Declaration of Independence. Again, the Fenians have a very strong grounding and support network in America. And again, equal civil and religious liberty, same thing in 1916. And in associating to protect one another and share public burdens, justice demands that such associations should rest upon a basis which maintains equality instead of destroying it. We therefore declare that unable longer to endure the curse of monarchical government, we aim at founding a republic based on universal suffrage. Everyone's going to get to vote, not just the rich. Does this refer to women getting to vote as well? It's debatable. Okay? Universal suffrage, it's like the Declaration of American Independence. All men are created equal, but we're talking about white colonists. Colonists were not interested in Navajos and black slaves. There can be a double standard. You have to be careful with the language and drawing too much out of it. And it says, the soil of Ireland, at present in the possession of an oligarchy, belongs to us, the Irish people, and to us it must be restored. We declare also in favour of absolute liberty of conscience and complete separation of church and state. Separation of church and state, again, that's coming to America, from America, and this was the Fenians' thing. We don't care what religion you are. The Fenians still had a very strong Protestant element. They said, we don't care what religion you are, but you keep it in the home place. You do not bring it into political life. And they were very opposed to, like most other Republicans, the Catholic Church's influence in politics in Ireland, which was largely anti-Republican. And just they finish off, we appeal to the highest tribunal, again this is an invocation of God, for evidence of the justness of our cause. History bears testimony to the integrity of our sufferings. And this really is what the next line, what the Fenian Proclamation is best known for. We declare in the face of our brethren that we intend no war against the people of England. Our war is against the aristocratic locusts, whether English or Irish, who have eaten the verdure of our fields and theirs, against the aristocratic leeches who drain alike our fields and theirs. So they're very strongly saying, you know, this is not an anti-English thing. These are the liberties that everyone should be entitled to, and they're kind of, it's very seditious against the establishment. Republicans of the entire world, our cause is your cause. Our enemy is your enemy. Let your hearts be with us. As for you, working men of England, it is not only your hearts we wish, but your arms. Remember the starvation and degradation brought to your firesides by the oppression of labour. Remember the past, look well to the future, and avenge yourselves by giving liberty to your children in the coming struggle for human liberty. Herewith we proclaim the Irish Republic, the Provisional Government. Again, the same terminology, the same formula being used there. As I said, it's a shorter style. It's very similar to 1916. One of the main differences is the audience. It's an international appeal rather than an appeal to Irish people directly. In fact, it refers to the English people and how they want them to understand it more so than it does actually Irish people. It's very progressive. It's very kind of left-wing, talking about aristocratic leeches, whether English or Irish. We're not nationalists. We're not going to favour the guy because he can speak Irish and he wears green and, you know, he's got lots of money. We're talking about the rights of the poor, the working man here. The separation of church and state, you know, very strong influence of American politics here. And this really goes to the role of the clergy in Irish politics. Because it has called for the separation of church and state, and because the Fenians would have had a lot of sympathy at the time, the Catholic Church comes out bell, book and candle against this. God's withering, blinding, blasting curse upon these Fenian bastards for whom hell is not hot enough nor eternity long enough. Bishop Moriarty of Kerry, that's him condemning the Fenians, okay? The bishops appealed to the cardinals and right up to the Pope. In 1870, the Pope condemns Fenianism. Not just secret oath-bound societies, which is what bishops usually came back from the Vatican with. The Pope condemns Fenianism in Ireland by name. So much for these guys being Catholic nationalists, okay? And the Catholic Church, we're pointing out, has condemned pretty much every Irish rebellion. 1798, 1803, 1840, 1867, 1916, okay? Very interesting to hear Archbishop Neil McMartin talk at the moment about that the celebrations of the Rising shouldn't be secular, that the Catholic Church should have an important role because of all the patriot priests that were involved. It would appear that Bishop Martin's predecessors spent most of the 1916 period excommunicating Republicans, but that doesn't stop them jumping on the bandwagon. And again, it's worth pointing out that while the Republicans would often have been very opposed to the Church's role in society, a lot of them would have had very strong religious faith and would have gotten on with very well with priests who supported their politics, but usually were very set against the established Catholic hierarchy. The third proclamation of the Republic, Easter 1916. I'm not going to go through every single note and line of this. You probably all know it well, may have copies of it at home. But just to point out a few things about it. As I said, it's very similar, and I think I've shown that 1803 and to 1867. It declares a republic. It declares independence from Britain. It says that these are existing rights. We're just reasserting them. It asserts the citizens' rights, and it calls to arms, and it appeals at the end for an honourable fight as well. So these are the men who signed it. Arranged here are the 7 signatories in order of how their names appear at the bottom of the document. Thomas Clark appears first. Now there's a lot of, I suppose, nonsense really is the only thing you can call it, about Clark being the real president of the Republic. It certainly was something his wife Kathleen claimed, but other members of the Clark family did not agree with it. Clark's name appears to have gone first on the proclamation because he was a link back to the older generation, the Fenians. They were expressing, for want of a less politically loaded word, continuity. Okay. There's documents from the 1916 Rising which name Pearse as president. Let's just knock that one on the head, and we won't discuss anything else that appeared in Rebellion, because the Rubber Bandits 1916 guide was way better. But this is them as they appear: Connolly, Patrick Pearse, McDiarmid, Clark, McDonough, Cant, and Joseph Mary Plunkett. Okay? This is a proclamation by committee. There is no guarantee that everyone writing it agreed with every scintilla of it. Kathleen Clark, well, I think she may be unreliable in other stuff, some of what she says is interesting. She says that when Tom Clark talked to her about the signing of the proclamation, that one of the 7 signatories was opposed to it being addressed to women and to granting the vote to women. She doesn't say who it was, beyond the fact that it wasn't Tom Clark. So you can have a guessing game with your friends afterwards who was the most sexist of the signatories. But it's a majority decision, if we're to believe her, it's 6-1. And you know, working in committees, things get, nuances, complexities get taken out. It's a broad platform people can agree on. There appear to be, and again, this is a conspiracy whose members are all dead within a month, okay? We don't know exactly how it was written. We don't know exactly who wrote the text, okay? But the 2 main authors, it's generally accepted by historians, are Patrick Pearse and Clark. Connolly. Clark, the others, these were very intensely political people. They paid for their beliefs with their lives. I'm sure they all had an input, but these men generally seem to be the 2 main authors. Kathleen Clark said that Pearse had been asked to draft the proclamation, and that he submitted it and changes were made. Why was Patrick Pearse picked as the president? The body of writing he left behind. He was a brilliant orator, he was a brilliant writer, and they knew that when they were dead, people could go and they could read his stuff, they could read his works in 2 languages, and it would make sense to them. Pearse appears to have written the main body of it, as I said. There was a brilliant website called Hark Vagrant Comes, and takes on different aspects of Irish history, and this is their interpretation of how the 1916 proclamation is written. I'll just leave it up there for a minute and take a quick break. You can all read it, you don't need me to do a Scottish accent for James Connolly or anything, no? So basically it has, Pearse having a very vague, kind of thin, nationalist, hooray, we're away from England, and Connolly, oh no, we need some Marxism here, whatever. It's comedy, it's poking fun at it, but it's also making a very serious point about the proclamation and how it was written, that it was a team effort, and that it did have some very important things to say. Again, the website is Hark Vagrant Comes. I encourage you to look at it. Where was the proclamation actually signed and written? Well, according to Kathleen Clark, it was signed in Jenny White's Powers House on 21 Henry Street. You can see the plaque there marking where it is today, put up by the 1621 Club, I think. I would argue that this is where Pearse presented the first draft of the proclamation, and then Connolly probably produced stuff for the other signatories did, and they came back a week later and finalised it. Because the one time we do know that all 7 signatories of the proclamation meet together is on Easter Sunday morning in Liberty Hall. All 7 of them are present, and a handwritten copy of the proclamation is brought down from one of the rooms upstairs down to the basement area where the 3 printers, I think Christopher Brady and 2 others, I think they were all Citizen Army men, set to work printing it. Interestingly, as soon as they arrived at Liberty Hall, Connolly said, "You're under arrest." Because he said, look, nothing against you guys, but this way, if we get picked up while the proclamation is being printed, we can argue that you did it under duress and won't be hanged with the rest of us who signed it. Okay. Brilliant. There's a great book out from the RIA at the moment, which has these brilliant kind of linographs of the different aspects of the Rising. And this shows the type of press they were using. and the proclamation being run off down in the basement. Now, it was done on a very old printer, and you have to remember this is in the middle of a war. Paper is short. The press, anytime the rebel press goes against the official establishment political line, it's being closed down, and the presses and the print are being confiscated. So they actually had to go and borrow print for this. James Connolly, of course, was publishing a newspaper at the time from Liberty Hall. That was all small newspaper print. Connolly told his printers that he wanted it to be big, he wanted it to be like an auction poster, that it would be seen by the people. So they needed to get bigger print, bigger font to do it in. And quite frankly, they didn't have enough. So they ended up chopping and changing and recycling things. Irish Republic, see the I there? That's actually a P. You can see they had to build it up using wax and put a little leg onto it. You'll find there's two different kind of E's in the proclamation. There's one in a standard English script, there's one in an old Irish script. To the people of Ireland, that's an F with a little bit added on. The C is an O with a bit chopped off. The printers of the Rising were really under pressure on a really old press to actually get these things produced, and they produced 1,000 of them within 24 hours. Again, I'm not going to go through every detail, but one thing again that makes the 1916 proclamation stand out is the use of Irish. Public Maher, okay, the Irish Republic. Now, to me, as someone who's learning Irish, why isn't there an Irish language version of the proclamation? Okay, did the rebels not think it was important? Well, of course they did. We know from the lives of Patrick Pearse and McDonough that they were very enthusiastic about the language. Connolly had an importance for it, but he said you can't teach starving men Gaelic. There's other things we need to do first. But why wasn't it produced in Irish? That will be the Irish version brought out by Cumra na Gaeilge at the moment, free online if anyone does want one. They'd need a lot of print, and they'd need to reset it to do the whole thing in Irish. And if you're going to do part in Irish, part in English, it's going to be more difficult to read. The other thing is that the proclamation is actually printed in two halves. They didn't even have enough text for one proclamation. They printed the first half of the proclamation, 1,000 of them, and then they put them through the printer again and printed the bottom half. And when the British soldiers went into the basement of Liberty Hall afterwards, they found the printing press still in place, but could only find the bottom half of the proclamation. They searched for the top half, couldn't find it, because of course it's the same letters reused. So they ran off souvenir copies, and this is one. You can tell it's not done by the printers, it's very badly smudged, but it's only the bottom half of the proclamation. So quite simply, they didn't have enough text, and they didn't have enough time to do an Irish language version of it. And you have to remember the chaos of the time, countermanding orders, casement getting arrested, and so on. Going back to, there's one more page I'm missing there actually. Yeah, the other thing is they didn't have the right type of text. Okay, we see the proclamation here, and Public Maher is written in a kind of standard Latin English text. Irish writing at the time was in Sean Gaeilge. So it's a completely different text. It's almost like the old Germans, and they didn't have that either. And if you printed the proclamation in an English language text, an Irish reader just wouldn't have been familiar with Irish being presented that way. So long story short, there's a whole heap of reasons why they didn't do it in Irish, but the fact that the very first line is in Irish is showing they think it's significant, the language. Okay? It addresses Irish men and Irish women. That was very radical for the time. It would have been very easy to address it just to Irish men and to fudge it afterwards and say, oh, we meant all Irish people the same way when we talk about the rights of man, we mean mankind, women are in there. But they didn't. And they didn't just leave it at addressing Irish men and Irish women. They made plain that they were in favour, or at least a majority of the Provisional Government were in favour of the women's right to vote. Suffrages of all her men and women is mentioned in the proclamation. Look at the standard in Irish politics at the time. John Redmond, a cartoon here of him stamping out the rights of the suffragette. Redmond's party was opposed to suffragettes and suffragism, the vote for women. Interestingly, suffragettes here in Dublin in 1912, one of them threw a hatchet into a carriage carrying the Prime Minister, and Redmond, when they were on their way to a Home Rule meeting, missed the Prime Minister, hit Redmond on the ear, and axe, but he did survive. But the Irish Parliamentaries Party attitude towards women and the vote, Joe Devlin, who was the deputy leader of the party, said giving the vote to women will be the ruin of Western civilization. One wonders what he would think of, oh, I need to plug in. One wonders what he would think of gender quotas. You talking? Sorry, technical problems. It's in here somewhere. Keep on, yeah. So we can edit this out, yeah? Just in the side there, and if you can find a socket. I got it, yeah. Keep going. Okay, so anyway, the vote for women, it's very radical at the time, and it's one of the things that everybody knows about the Proclamation. I'd argue there's two voices in the Proclamation. There's Ireland personified. We talk about Ireland summons her children to her flag, Ireland through us. So it's like a person of Ireland. We see it personified here, you know, this kind of romantic nationalist idea of Ireland. And then you also hear the voice of the Provisional Government. We declare, we place the cause of the Republic. Now, Ireland personified, that's probably Pearse. This comes from old, late medieval poetry in Irish, aisling. Aisling is a girl's name, but it also means a vision of Ireland coming as a woman and telling these patriots and poets, you know, to be free and so on. We hear Éire, the name of the country. That's an old goddess. Roisin Dubh, we know the phrases, the Maid of Éire. Even the statue that's on top of the GPO is Hibernia. It's a representation of Ireland as a woman. So a lot of that romantic imagery probably comes from Pearse, and a lot of the political statements, the very cutting political stuff, is attributed to Connolly, but could as easily, as I said, come from Thomas Clarke or someone else as well. Again, we're never going to know 100% because it was written in secret by a committee. Again, the language being very kind of Gaelic nationalist in Ireland as a woman, it could also refer to the French Revolution. There's the idea of Marianne, as she's called, liberty crossing the barricades. I think this painting was done in the 1800s, would have been familiar to all of them. Ireland summons her children to her flag. You know, very romantic phrase, and again, summing up what's happening in the photo. Talks about children of the nation in the Proclamation. That could be, you know, children of Ireland as a mother and Gaelic stuff. It could also be Les Enfants de la Patrie. We're all familiar with the French national anthem and children of the nation. So it could be classic Republican imagery as well. Children of the nation, this is the most misused part of the Proclamation, is not referring specifically to small people, children. We all start out that way and they will grow into various children of the nation. It's talking, probably most people accept, about Protestant Unionists. The fear they had at the time, they were opposed to Home Rule because they felt Home Rule would be Rome Rule, that their religious rights would be denied to them. Again, the Catholic Church had a very strong influence in Irish politics. The Home Rule Party was very strongly linked with the Ancient Order of Hibernians, who were sectarian, Catholic, quasi-physical force group, very similar to the Orange Order, but a Catholic version. And Joseph Devlin again declared that the Irish Parliamentary Party was the right arm of the Catholic Church. That's how strongly linked they were. And Republicans were opposed to such strong church involvement in politics, usually because, of course, it was against them, as well as being a point of principle that they wanted to end sectarianism. When we talk about the children of the nation equally in the Proclamation, being treated equally regardless of the differences fostered by an alien government which have divided a minority from the majority in the past. It probably does refer to Protestant loyalists in Ireland, but we don't know that it can't refer to other minorities. Okay? And we'll go again and so. Okay? Tusa, Missa, Trorigan. Okay? It's Runlachwid. We're a minority. Okay? You're a majority. What divides Irish speakers from English speakers in this country? Our history, our heritage, things that happened in the British rule. They could be referring to the rights of Irish speakers there. They could be talking about the minority planters, English colonists, who mightn't necessarily be of a different religion, still be Catholics, and natives. It could be talking about the wealthy and the poor. It could be talking about Catholic and Protestant. But the point they're making essentially is, regardless of what interpretation you put, all citizens are equal. That's my take on it anyway. The imagery, how the Proclamation is actually presented to the public, goes back, I think, again to General Humbert in 1798. Flag is raised over the GPO, 2 flags in fact, the tricolour and the Irish Republic flag, and Pearse and Connolly and their followers step out underneath these flags and proclaim a republic, very similar to what Humbert had done. Here it is from a rebellion, probably not a bad representation of what it would have looked like on the day. Copies of the proclamation then were posted up around Dublin. Can you imagine if they had just printed the proclamation and, you know, posted them up and the shot hadn't been fired? Okay, they were making, by linking it to the rebellion, by putting their money where their mouth was, by putting their words into action and staging a rebellion at the same time, they were showing they were serious. Ernie O'Malley talked about him going into Dublin, seeing the proclamation posted up, reading it and kind of laughing, thinking it was a joke, until he saw the names at the bottom and said, those guys are serious. So the rising and the publication of the proclamation, they're interlinked as the one event. This is Ed McSweeney. It's a photo of the proclamation in place at the time. This one was posted outside his home at 85 St. Stephen's Green. So it's probably one of the only photos we have of someone in 1916 actually reading one. And I'm going to wrap up now. We all know that in modern times, of course, it's key to Irish politics. We can all quote bits of it, or some of us, all of it maybe. The first reprint of it is done in 1917, and it's done by women in the Citizen Army and a printer called Joe Stanley. And that's the 1917 version of the proclamation, which was posted up around the city, basically marking the first anniversary. And of course, there's many different varieties since, but if you have a copy of that at home, they're actually as valuable, if not rarer, than the original document, so hold on to it. It gets reused time and time again. It's a very strong image in militant republicanism. In the late 1930s, Sean Russell and the IRA launch a bombing campaign, the S Plan in Britain. It's another attempt, as they see it, to establish, well not establish, but to bring about an Irish Republic. Now, this is what they do. They don't actually print it as a poster, but they send a copy of the original proclamation and their own kind of political statement here beside it with their own names attached. And this is posted to newspapers in Britain. So this is something they've learned from the Fenians. But it doesn't proclaim a new republic. And I would argue that in some ways there's an ideological prism of the republic, that there's one republic. It was established in 1916, it was, you know, endorsed in 1919, and some people would argue, you know, that still exists to the present day, and, you know, that's the only legitimate authority. But I would say if you look at French republicanism, they can declare a new republic when the old one fails. So when this doesn't happen traditionally in kind of very doctrinaire Irish republicanism from 1916 onwards, they just say the 1916 republic, that's the one that is, we're reasserting it, but we're not proclaiming a new one. Brilliant parodies have been done over the years. This one by the Republican Socialist group Irigi, the Nama Republic, and again they passed out copies of that, fair play to them. The other thing is that we have to realise the proclamation isn't perfect. The cure for cancer isn't in there. It doesn't solve every political thing. It doesn't talk about every political situation. And people on all sides of arguments who don't understand the context will use it incorrectly. For example, this is a leaflet from the marriage equality, gay marriage referendum there last year. And it says, "We cannot forget the great leaders of 1916 who drafted the proclamation which proclaimed their desire for the protection of marriage and family." It doesn't talk about that anywhere in the proclamation. The proclamation wants it to have to tell us about gay marriage. Nothing. It doesn't say anything against it. It doesn't say anything in favour of it. They're not concerned with it. And you can put who knows what the guy's thoughts on it were. But to go on again, the proclamation formed the basis of our constitution. No, it didn't. Okay? The 1937 constitution has very little in common with the proclamation. Okay? So don't look there for all answers. There's other things we have to look at. The Proclamation, which was brought out during the year, the 1916 Proclamation in chocolate. I would ask, the first thing I would ask is, was it a fair trade bar? Because if you're going to put statement about liberty into chocolate form, I at least hope the farmer is being treated fairly. This I saw in Dublin today, and I had to include it. 1916, Rise of the Rebels, Ride the Revolution. make of that what you will, but again, it's the text of the proclamation. The point I'm coming to is that people are going to use it in many different ways, okay? Some appropriate, some maybe not so appropriate. But what is the importance of this document? Why have I been withering on here for the last hour, and I'm going to stop in a minute? They're all dead 100 years. Why does it matter? It matters not just to us in Ireland. It matters to, as the Fenians said, Republicans of the world, our cause is your cause. The American Declaration of 1776 was the crack that shattered what some historians would call the first British Empire. I would argue that the 1916 proclamation in Ireland leads to the collapse of the second British Empire. Okay, Africa, India, all these places. This is the Friends of Freedom for India, marching alongside Irish Republicans in New York in 1920 in the St. Patrick's Day parade. Okay, they are inspired by events taking place in Ireland. Dan Breen, this is his book, My Fight for Irish Freedom, first published 1924. Does anyone recognise the language? I think it's Urdu. Every Indian revolutionary in the 1920s and the 1930s had this in their pockets. I think it was translated into 30 different languages, okay? And then there's this guy, Surya Sen, leader of the HRA, the Hindustan Republican Army. Where did they get that title from? Okay? They launched a rebellion against British rule in India the 18th of April, Easter 1930. These are Hindus, not Christians. Why are they launching a rebellion in Easter time? They're expressing a link back to the Irish Republic of 1916. They take over a police barracks, they raise the new flag, the Indian flag over it, and they proclaim a provisional government. General Humbert, Patrick Pearse, Surya Sen, okay, all the same. He's hanged by the British, incidentally, 12th of January 1934, a few years later. The African National Congress, Nelson Mandela, South Africa. We often talk of Nelson Mandela as a great, huge international statesman, but people often talk of him, as a man of peace. Let's be clear, in South Africa, they had to fight for their rights. And Kader Asmal, who's one of the leaders of the African National Congress, said that their Freedom Charter of 1955, copy of it here, he said when they were writing it, they based it on 1916, and in particular the way that it was addressed to all Irishmen and all the children of the nation. This wasn't just black South Africans or Africans of Indian heritage who were talking to themselves. It was to everyone, to make them all citizens. And that, I think, is really important. Bad news for you is I have homework. Okay? Just because we have heard about the proclamation tonight does not mean we can go out of here and all the experts on what the men of 1916 thought. Probably very few of those who fought in the rebellion had actually seen the proclamation before or would have gotten to read it during Easter week. Okay? It's a proclamation, they obviously would have had very similar Republican or advanced nationalist politics, but we can't agree that everyone who took part in the rising agreed with every sentence of it. The other thing is proclamation by committee. There's a wide range of views. They're probably very nuanced and complex. If you want to know what the men of 1916 and the women of 1916 thought, you have to go out and read everything they wrote. You have to read Patrick Pearse's writings, and not just in English. You have to get stuck into the Irish stuff as well. The pamphlets and newspapers from Connolly, Tom Clark's newspaper, Irish Freedom, speeches of Sean McDermott. And don't just focus on those who were executed, whose names we know. You need to read and study everything available from the time. And the other thing is, this isn't the only revolutionary document from the period. 1919, the first All-Ireland sets out a Declaration of Independence, a message to the free nations of the world, and a democratic programme. They're just as important and deserve probably a similar place, if not as an important place, in the history of the period. So to conclude, very strong similarities between the proclamations. They all borrow from one another and from earlier documents. Usually there's changes to modernise it, to reflect the zeitgeist, the political, military things that are happening at the time. But there's also a very strong continuity of Republican principles and ideals. As well as asserting Irish independence, all the proclamations have it in a Republican form. It's not a new Irish nation, a new Irish state. They're very clear that it's a republic, and they're very strong on being anti-sectarian and breaking the sectarian mould of Irish politics, because that is where the United Irishmen, the first Republicans, emerged out of. In a shameful piece of self-promotion, these are copies of some of my books, some of which I have on sale here. In a slightly less shameful piece of self-promotion, I'm heading up our local commemoration committee in County Clare, people from all different political and religious backgrounds on it. I'm selling these booklets here, I have a handful of them at $5 each, and they're putting up monuments like this one to Robert Burns, who was the first trade unionist and Republican, the first Republican casualty of the War of Independence. That's a monument we put up last year. This is the one we're unveiling for Easter down in County Clare. So if you're fed up hanging around the GPO, come down and pay us a visit. And
Where?
Meelick, just over the border from Limerick City, my home place. It's to the East Clare Brigade. So lastly, just to finish up, thank you very much for listening. Questions are welcome.